Hi, I'm Joan Newberger, and today we're here with David Oshinsky. David's a modern American historian, and he has won awards for teaching and writing. Most recently, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his book, Polio, An American Story. Hi, David.
Hi, glad to be here.
His most recent book is Capital Punishment on Trial, Furman v. Georgia, and the Death Penalty in Modern America. So why don't we just start right with the case itself. What makes Furman v. Georgia such an important case?
Well, for a number of reasons. One, it's the longest written case in American history. It's a case in which 9 justices wrote 9 separate opinions, which is almost unheard of. It was a 5-4 decision, and it was a decision about capital punishment. And what made it particularly revealing is that each judge sort of represented a slice of American opinion about capital punishment. Was it racist? How did it affect the poor? Did it deter crime? Was it arbitrary and capricious? So in a sense, it's very rare to get a single case that kind of encapsulates virtually everything that Americans are thinking. And this case was so important that each judge felt the need to write a separate opinion.
One of the things that's really interesting about capital punishment is that it seems to be something all human societies have in common, at least except that it's that we kill people who have committed crimes against us. And yet, at the same time, periodically we feel really uncomfortable with it.
Yes.
Shakespeare dramatized it in ancient Greece. It was dramatized. Why, at the time of Furman v. Georgia, what were the sources of that discomfort?
That's a very good question. There were a number of discomforting notions about capital punishment. One was that we had just come out of World War II, where entire societies were run by homicidal maniacs who were using the state to kill. And therefore, this kind of genocide sort of leached into the debate about capital punishment. There also had been a number of disquieting cases in the 1950s that got an awful lot of publicity. The Carol Chessman case in California, the Barbara Graham case. These were all white people who had been executed. And I think capital punishment is often seen as racist. It's used more against African Americans and other groups. It's used more against the poor than against the rich. These were cases that were disquieting because the people who were being executed were different than the average person who had been executed over time. And there was also a feeling, I think, above all, that we had begun to evolve as a society. And although no one doubted that the Founding Fathers all supported capital punishment, there was the belief that as society evolves, that you get kind of different values, and that we had begun to see capital punishment as something that was archaic, that was unusually cruel, and that might, in some eyes, violate the Eighth Amendment's strictures against cruel and unusual punishment.
Do you think it had any connection with the other upheavals going on in the 1960s?
I think it did, particularly the civil rights movement in the United States. The NAACP and Thurgood Marshall, who would then become a justice, in fact, would be one of the justices who dissented in Furman v. Georgia, there was really a belief that a disproportionate number of African Americans were being executed, a disproportionate number were on death row, that most of the states that were doing the executing had come from the old Confederacy. And therefore there really was a racial tinge. And what happens is that the NAACP really begins to take on capital punishment as a major cause, along with school desegregation, housing, and the like. And the notion of criminal activity, and particularly how America punishes criminal activity, becomes, in the 60s, part of the civil rights movement.
People thought that Furman v. Georgia was going to be the end of capital punishment.
That is correct. In the 1960s, fewer and fewer people were being executed, and fewer people were being sentenced to death. Juries really began to, as the civil rights movement evolved, began to take a second look at this. And then comes this case of an illiterate young black man is charged in Georgia on felony murder. And felony murder in some ways is the most common type of capital punishment case. It means that it's if you kill someone, even if you don't mean to kill that person, but it's while you are involved in another felony, in other words, in this case it was a robbery, and the gun went off, that's felony murder, and you really are responsible for that death. So Furman he's a black man in Georgia, it's an all-white jury, takes the jury a couple of hours to find him guilty and to sentence him to death. And the Supreme Court really has to take a look at how fair are these death penalty cases. And by that I mean that in some states what Furman did would not have been a capital crime. There was a sense that there were 1,000 other crimes like this committed in Georgia, and yet Furman was on death row and the 999 other people who committed similar crimes were not on death row. So how arbitrary and capricious is this? And the most important thing, I think, is that as fewer and fewer people were being executed, there was a sense of what is the deterrence in this? If we're really not going to use this, what is the point? It seems to be kind of the worst form of retribution meted out against someone whose crime is not that much different than hundreds of other crimes. So it seemed to be so rare and arbitrary, and actually one of the justices said, you know, being executed in the United States in 1972 is really like being struck by lightning. I mean, that is how arbitrary it is. And what the Supreme Court said in a 5-4 decision to the states was, we do not find capital punishment per se to be unconstitutional, but we do find capital punishment the way it is being imposed in Georgia and elsewhere to be so arbitrary and capricious as to violate the Eighth Amendment. And really what the Supreme Court said to Georgia and to all other states was, if you want to keep using capital punishment, you damn well better make laws that pass muster with us vis-a-vis the Eighth Amendment. The question was whether the states would do that.
And that opened up the possibility for writing new laws and continuing capital punishment.
That is correct. And what is really clear is that even the justices who supported capital punishment, they were the 4 in the minority in this case, they were certain that the states would not go back and pass new laws. They thought to themselves, you know, capital punishment is over, it's done with, it may or may not be better this way, but we really can't see the states doing it. But in fact, lots of states, Texas in the lead, really went back and tried to write laws that would pass muster. And what I try to show in the book is that what happens in the late 1960s and early 70s, just as Furman is coming down the pike, is there is a huge spike in urban crime in the United States. Violent crime does go up, and you begin to see, you know, all these Charles Bronson movies, Clint Eastwood movies, vigilantes, Bernard Goetz in the subway in New York City and the like. And there was a sense that society was sort of getting out of control, and politicians really sort of brought capital punishment back into the debate. Why is crime so high? Because we're not punishing people hard enough. Capital punishment will be the linchpin here. It never had been, but we will begin to use it now. And what the states began to do were to rewrite their laws so that capital punishment would be seen as legal by the Supreme Court.